Students, in our next lecture we'll consider about Hofstede's mental program, categorization. Hofstede argues that people carry mental programs that are developed and reinforced through their experience, and that those mental programs contain a component of national culture. After analyzing the data from more than 40 countries, Hofstede concludes that these mental programs denote the existence of 4 underlying value dimensions, along which these countries could be positioned into culture areas. He suggests the following dimensions of national culture. First, power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and the long-term orientation and short-term orientation. Power distance indexed, that is the extent to which the less powerful members of organizations and the institutions, like the family, accept and expect that power is distributed unequally. This represents inequality, but defined from below, not from above. It suggests that a society's level of inequality is endorsed by the followers as much as by the leaders. Power and inequality, of course, are extremely fundamental facts of any society, and anybody with some international experience will be aware that all societies are unequal, but some are more unequal than others. Power distance, defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. In large power distance, employees they're afraid of bosses. In small power distance, employees approach and challenge bosses. In large power distance, they depend on their bosses. In small power distance, employees don't depend on their bosses. On the contrary, bosses consult with staff. In large power distance, there is large emotional distance. In small power distance, there is small emotional distance. Individualism, the next. On the other side, versus its opposite, collectivism. That is the degree to which individuals are integrated into groups. On the individualist side, we find societies in which the ties between individuals are loose. Everyone is expected to look after him or himself, herself, or after his or her immediate family. On the collectivist side, we find societies in which people from birth onwards are integrated into strong, cohesive, in groups, often extended families, with uncles, aunts, and grandparents, which continue protecting them in exchange for unquestioning loyalty. The word collectivism, in this sense, has no political meaning. It refers to the group, not to the state. Again, the issue addressed by this dimension is an extremely fundamental one regarding all societies in the world. So, individualism attitude of valuing ourselves as separate individuals with responsibility for our own destinies and actions. Collectivism emphasizes common interests, conformity, cooperation, and interdependence. Interests of individual outweigh the interests of the group. In collectivism, interests of the group outweigh the interests of the individual. Individual is interdependent or independent. In collectivism, group is one's identity. In individualism, one must look after himself or herself. In collectivism, it's a group protection. Masculinity versus its opposite, femininity, refers to the distribution of roles between the genders, which is another fundamental issue for any society, to which a range of solutions are found. The IBM studies revealed that women's values differ less among societies than men's values. Men's values from one country to another contain a dimension from very assertive and competitive and maximally different from women's values on the one side to modest and caring and similar to women's values on the other side. The assertive pole has been called masculine and the modest caring pole feminine. The women in feminine countries have the same modest, caring values as the men. In the masculine countries, they are somewhat assertive and competitive, but not as much as the men, so that these countries show a gap between men's values and women's values. In masculinity, social gender roles are defined. In femininity, social gender roles overlap. In masculinity, men are assertive and tough. In femininity, men and women are both modest and concerned with quality of life. Then women are modest and concerned with quality of life. In masculinity, there is a high difference between the genders. In femininity, there is little difference between genders. Uncertainty Avoidance Indexed. Uncertainty Avoidance Indexed deals with the society's tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. It ultimately refers to man's search for truth. It indicates to what extent a culture programs its members to feel either uncomfortable or comfortable. In unstructured situations. Unstructured situations are novel, unknown, surprising, different from usual. Uncertainty avoiding cultures try to minimize the possibility of such situations by strict laws and rules, safety and security measures. And on the philosophical and religious level, by a belief in absolute truth. There can only be one truth, and we have it. People in uncertainty avoiding countries are also more emotional and motivated by inner nervous energy. The opposite type, uncertainty accepting cultures, are more tolerant of opinions different from what they are used to. They try to have as few rules as possible, and on the philosophical and religious level they are relativist and allow many currents to flow side by side. People within these cultures are more phlegmatic and contemplative and not expected by their environment to express their emotions. What is long-term orientation? Long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. This fifth dimension was found in a study among students in 23 countries around the world. Using a questionnaire designed by Chinese scholars, and it can be said to deal with virtue regardless of truth. Values associated with long-term orientation are thrift and perseverance. Values associated with short-term orientation are respect for tradition, fulfilling social obligations, and protecting one's faith. Both the positive and the negative rated values of this dimension are found in the teaching of Confucius, the most influential Chinese philosopher, who lived around 500 BC. However, the dimension also applies to countries without a Confucian heritage. According to Hofstede, these dimensions represent the basic elements of common structure in the cultural systems of the countries. Thus, these dimensions provide an important framework not only for analyzing national culture, but also for considering the effects of cultural differences on management and organization. This framework is especially useful for understanding people's conceptions of an organization, the mechanisms that are considered appropriate in controlling and coordinating the activities within it. Thank you for your attention.